They thought she was just another helpless woman, an easy target for their trafficking operation. But they had no idea who her husband was. He wasn't just any man. He was a seasoned trucker, a former soldier, trained to track, hunt, and fight for what was his. When they took her, they didn't know the hell they were about to unleash. Now, they were going to learn what happens when you mess with a trucker's family. What would you do if someone took the person you love most? This cartel made the worst mistake of their lives, and now they're about to pay. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty highway. The air was thick with heat, but Claire didn't mind. It was the kind of weather she was used to, the kind that told you it was time to keep your eyes open. She had spent enough time on the road with her husband, Caleb, to know that things could go sideways in an instant, especially on these desolate stretches. Her eyes scanned the horizon as she walked to the small convenience store at the edge of the truck stop. Caleb had warned her about these places. There were whispers of trouble in the air, stories about people getting taken, disappearing without a trace, victims of human traffickers who operated in the shadows. Claire shook off the unease and entered the store. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside, greeted by the cool, air-conditioned relief. She quickly grabbed a bottle of water, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in her chest. As she made her way to the counter, she noticed a group of men gathered near the back of the store, their eyes following her every move. It wasn't unusual for truck stops to have the occasional stranger lurking around, but these men, dressed in dark, weathered clothing, exuded a kind of intensity that made Claire feel uncomfortable. They were too focused on her, their eyes lingering a little too long. As she placed the bottle on the counter, one of them, a tall, muscular man with a jagged scar running across his cheek, stepped closer. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice smooth but carrying an edge. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She tried to brush past him, her instincts telling her to get out, but the man blocked her path. "Not so fast," he said, his tone more forceful now. "We're just trying to be friendly." Her pulse quickened. This wasn't good. "I'm fine," Claire said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just need to get back to my truck." The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "I'm sure your truck's nice, but you look like you're in the wrong place at the wrong time." He gestured to his companions, who now surrounded her, their expressions unreadable. Claire's mind raced. She had seen enough in her time on the road to know when something wasn't right. These weren't just guys looking for a quick drink. They were fishing, trying to size her up, trying to see if they could take her. Her hand instinctively moved to the pocket of her jacket, where she always carried a small knife her husband had given her. It was for self-defense, for moments like this. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. The man with the scar moved even closer, his breath hot against her ear. "We're not gonna hurt you, sweetheart. We just need you to come with us, nice and quiet." At that moment, Claire heard the unmistakable sound of a truck engine outside. Caleb. Her heart skipped a beat. He had warned her that he'd be back soon. He never liked leaving her alone for too long. The sound of his truck's engine echoed through the lot, and for a split second, Claire thought she might be able to get out of this. But she wasn't sure if he'd be able to make it in time. The tall man smiled, as if reading her mind. "Don't worry. He won't be able to help you. You're ours now." Just then, the sound of the truck engine grew louder, and the men in the store turned their attention toward the door. Claire seized the moment. With a sudden, sharp movement, she elbowed the man in front of her in the stomach, knocking him back just enough to break free. She sprinted for the door, but as her hand grabbed the handle, the scarred man grabbed her wrist, pulling her back into the store. "Not so fast," he growled. "I think we need to have a little chat." But Claire's mind was already working. She wasn't going down without a fight. Just as the men closed in on her, the sound of Caleb's truck screeching to a stop outside filled the air. The doors of the convenience store burst open, and Caleb stormed in, his eyes burning with anger. Without a word, he grabbed the scarred man by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You made the biggest mistake of your life," Caleb growled, his voice low and menacing. The traffickers hesitated, unsure of how to react. But Caleb was a man who never hesitated when it came to protecting what was his. "Let her go," he ordered, his tone a deadly calm. Claire could see the fear flash in the eyes of the men now. They weren't expecting Caleb. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The man with the scar tried to make a move, but Caleb's fist connected with his jaw with a sickening thud, sending him sprawling to the floor. The rest of the traffickers quickly realized they were outmatched. They didn't even try to fight back. The traffickers recovered quickly, their surprise at Caleb's sudden appearance turning into rage. The store was filled with tension as Claire backed away from the group, her breath shallow. Caleb was between her and the men, his fists clenched and ready for whatever they threw at him. He'd seen this kind of aggression before, but this time it was different. It wasn't just about intimidation anymore. It was personal. The man with the scar stood up first, wiping blood from his lip. His eyes were wild with fury. He spit on the ground, his hand already reaching for the gun tucked into his waistband. "You think you can just walk in here and stop us?" he snarled. "You don't know who we are." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't care who you are. If you think I'm going to let you take my wife, you've made the biggest mistake of your life." The men, realizing they were no longer in control, started circling Caleb, their expressions hardening. The store felt smaller now, the walls closing in. The sunlight outside barely made it through the grimy windows, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Claire could see the flicker of danger in their eyes. They were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. The scarred man's finger twitched on the trigger. "You should have stayed out of this," he spat. "You don't know what we'll do to her if you don't let us leave. You're dead either way." The words were meant to intimidate, but they only fueled Caleb's anger. He wasn't a man who backed down, not for anything or anyone. The man with the scar lunged at Caleb, the gun aimed straight for his chest. Caleb sidestepped, his body moving with precision. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it violently until the gun fell to the floor with a loud clatter. But the other traffickers weren't standing still. One of them grabbed a nearby bottle, shattering it over Caleb's head. He staggered, momentarily disoriented. The traffickers took advantage of the moment, moving in fast. Claire's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold. She knew her husband wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for both of them. Caleb swung a punch at one of the men, connecting with his jaw and sending him flying backward. The sound of fists hitting flesh echoed through the store, but the other two men didn't retreat. They had underestimated Caleb's strength, and now they were paying for it. But their anger was palpable. They were starting to lose control. The scarred man growled, grabbing a broken piece of glass from the floor. He advanced on Caleb, aiming for his side, his movements fast and erratic. Caleb barely saw it coming. The glass scraped against his ribs, drawing blood, but it only seemed to fuel his rage. "You think a little glass is going to stop me?" Caleb gritted his teeth, his voice low and dangerous. "You've just sealed your fate." With a ferocity that caught the traffickers off guard, Caleb grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back and pushing him to the floor. The others tried to rush him, but they were uncoordinated, fueled by frustration and too quick to act. One of the men swung a chair at Caleb, knocking him backward, but he didn't falter. Caleb knew he had to end this quickly before they could regroup. The adrenaline coursed through him, and in a fluid motion, he disarmed the man holding the chair, slamming it against the wall. The traffickers now stood in a disorganized circle around him, fear creeping into their eyes. Caleb had just shattered the facade of their power. He wasn't backing down, and they were realizing they had no way out. "Get up," Caleb growled, his voice dark and unwavering. "You don't get to walk away from this." The traffickers hesitated. frustration bubbling over as they realized they had no control over the situation anymore. They had pushed too far, and now they were paying the price. Caleb stood in the center of the store, his bloodied face a mask of determination. The traffickers were circling, their movements frantic, their earlier confidence slipping with every second. The man with the scar, still clutching the broken glass, was the last to stand. The others were on the floor, groaning in pain, trying to get up, but failing. Claire, her heart pounding in her chest, watched from the corner of the room. She had always known Caleb was tough, but this was something else. He wasn't just defending her. He was showing them exactly what happens when you push the wrong man. The scarred man lunged, aiming for Caleb's chest with the shard of glass, but Caleb's reaction was lightning fast. He stepped aside, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it behind his back, causing the trafficker to drop the glass with a painful scream. Caleb slammed him into a shelf, the impact rattling the metal frame and sending cans of food crashing to the ground. "You're not walking away from this," Caleb muttered, his voice cold, a stark contrast to the chaos around him. The last remaining trafficker, who had been hesitant to join the fray, finally charged at Caleb, swinging a crowbar. But Caleb saw him coming and disarmed him in an instant, taking the crowbar and twisting it out of the man's hands before delivering a brutal punch to his gut. The man crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, unable to move. With all of them down, Caleb took a step back, his chest heaving with every breath, the blood on his shirt slowly soaking through the fabric. His eyes, once calm and calculating, were now filled with fury. He had been silent until now, letting them underestimate him, letting them think they had control. But now, they had learned the hard way. He turned to Claire, his expression softening for a moment. "It's over." Claire could only nod, her body trembling with a mix of relief and fear. She had never seen him like this before, unleashing the full force of his strength, protecting her with everything he had. It wasn't just physical power. It was his will, his refusal to let anyone hurt his family that had brought them down. Caleb wiped the sweat and blood from his face and turned toward the defeated traffickers. "Next time you think about taking someone from my family, remember this moment." The traffickers had no words left. They were beaten, broken, and utterly humiliated. They had tried to break him, but in the end, it was Caleb who had broken them. The traffickers lay sprawled across the floor, groaning in pain, unable to move. Caleb stood over them, his breathing heavy, his fists clenched, still ready for anything. The scarred man, who had once been the most confident of the group, was now nothing more than a broken shell of his former self. His once imposing figure was now reduced to a crumpled heap, his breath ragged, his face bruised and bloodied. "You thought you could come into my world, huh?" Caleb said, his voice calm but dripping with contempt. He looked down at the men, his eyes scanning each one of them. "You thought you could take what's mine, my wife, my life, and walk away without consequences." The traffickers had no response. They could barely move, their pride shattered in front of their eyes. The youngest of them, the one who had tried to act tough at the beginning, now lay huddled against the wall, his face pale, his hands trembling. He had been the most eager to fight, but now he was realizing the full extent of his mistake. "Get up," Caleb ordered, his tone cold and authoritative. "You don't get to lay there like rats. You're not even worth the ground you're lying on." The scarred man tried to push himself up, but his body betrayed him, his limbs too weak to support his weight. He collapsed back down, his eyes meeting Caleb's for a split second, fear, confusion, and shame all swirling in his gaze. Caleb took a step closer, the floor creaking beneath his boots. "How does it feel?" Caleb asked, his voice like ice. "How does it feel knowing that you tried to take the woman I love, and now look at you? Pathetic. A group of grown men, lying in the dirt, begging for mercy you won't get." Claire stood by the door, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. She had never seen Caleb this way before, this cold, controlled, and unrelenting. But as much as she feared for the traffickers, she couldn't deny the rush of adrenaline she felt as the power dynamic shifted. The men who had once thought they were in control were now begging for their lives, reduced to nothing more than failures. One of the traffickers, a burly man with a deep scar across his forehead, opened his mouth, attempting to speak, but his words were choked by fear. You don't know who we work for. You can't just do this." His voice trailed off, a whimper of desperation. "Oh, I know exactly who you work for," Caleb replied, his expression darkening. "And you're going to wish you never came near me, near her." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You're nothing now. Your boss won't come to save you. No one will." Caleb turned toward the counter, grabbing a stack of papers, photos, and addresses that had been dropped during the chaos. With deliberate, cold precision, he began rifling through them, his eyes scanning each one. "Tell your boss he's going to be hearing from me. I'll make sure everyone knows what happened here." He threw the papers onto the floor, his fist slamming onto the counter in anger. The traffickers cowered as the weight of Caleb's words settled on them. The man with the scar tried to speak, but his voice cracked, the fear overtaking him. "No one's coming for you," Caleb continued, his voice quieter now, but no less powerful. "This is the end of the line for you. You've lost everything, and now you'll pay the price for trying to take what doesn't belong to you." The traffickers could only look at each other, their confidence long gone. The once proud men who had believed they could manipulate the world with their connections were now defenseless and powerless, destroyed by a man they had underestimated. Caleb turned to Claire, his face softening for the first time. "Let's go," he said, his voice gentle. "They won't be a problem anymore." He walked toward the door, his hand reaching for Claire's, guiding her toward the exit. Behind them, the traffickers lay motionless, their bodies too broken to move, their pride shattered. They had thought they were untouchable, but Caleb had shown them that even the strongest men can be destroyed when they underestimate the power of love and unrelenting determination. As the door closed behind them, Caleb's final words echoed in the empty store. "Next time you think about trafficking someone, remember this moment. This is what happens when you mess with the wrong people." And just like that, the traffickers' reputation was obliterated. They were no longer a feared force. They were nothing. A lesson learned the hard way. As Caleb and Claire drove down the highway, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the open road. The rush of adrenaline had long passed, leaving a stillness in the air. Claire's mind kept replaying the events of the day, the terror of being taken, the chaos of the fight, and the quiet strength Caleb had shown. The man she had married had been more than just a protector. He had been a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless when it came to defending what mattered most. Claire glanced at Caleb as he focused on the road, his jaw clenched, his hands still firm on the steering wheel. He hadn't spoken much since the confrontation, but she knew he was processing everything too. "How are you doing?" Claire asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Caleb's gaze flicked briefly to her before returning to the road. His eyes softened, and for the first time in hours, he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine. We're fine." Claire nodded but couldn't shake the weight of what they had just gone through. It wasn't just the fear. It was the realization that they had come face to face with evil, and Caleb had faced it head-on. His strength, his courage. It was everything she had always admired in him. But today, it had been more than just physical strength. It was his will, his refusal to let anyone or anything harm the ones he loved. It had been the strength of a man willing to risk everything to protect the people he cared about. And it wasn't just the strength Caleb showed that mattered. It was also the lesson that went deeper. True power doesn't lie in the ability to hurt others. It lies in the ability to protect and fight for what's right. Caleb hadn't used his strength to destroy. He had used it to defend, to make sure that those who were vulnerable wouldn't remain that way. He didn't seek revenge, but he didn't hesitate when he saw injustice. For Claire, that lesson wasn't just about the fight itself. It was about knowing that some things are worth fighting for, fighting with everything you have. It was about family, about love, and about standing up to the world when it tries to take everything you've built. She turned to Caleb, her voice steady now, but with a soft edge of admiration. "I've never seen anyone like you before." Caleb's eyes flickered briefly to hers, and he gave her a knowing look. "You're just like me, Claire. You have that strength too. Don't ever forget that." She smiled, but it was bittersweet. She had always known Caleb was tough, but today had shown her just how deep his strength went, how far he would go to protect the ones he loved. It was the kind of love that transcended everything, the kind of love that didn't need words or promises, because the actions spoke louder than any vow ever could. As the truck hummed down the highway, Claire thought about the future. She thought about the dangers they might face, the challenges ahead. But she also thought about the strength they had, together. The road was long, but they would face it side by side, ready for whatever came next. And she knew that no matter what, they would never back down. She turned to Caleb one last time. "We did good, didn't we?" Caleb's lips curled into a small smile. "Yeah, we did." For a long while, they drove in silence, the sound of the truck's engine humming like a lullaby in the background. It was peaceful now. The world outside felt like a distant memory. They had survived, and they had learned something that would stay with them forever. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you fight for those you love, but those are also the battles worth fighting. So, I ask you, if someone tried to take the person you love most, how far would you go to protect them? Would you fight back, no matter the cost? Or would you run? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in fighting for what's right, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of strength, love, and justice.